And you get rid of
Okie dokie. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Happy Tuesday. We have a great program with a speaker who has done several programs for the Bar Association, and we're always so grateful, Mr. Robert Jacobs. We were thrilled to have him back. Today it's mediation, why the other side won't settle, and what you can do about it. You will receive your attendance certificate, materials, evaluation form via email from me in about a week or so. So keep an eye out for that. Um, and we will take questions all at the end. So go ahead and put them in the chat throughout the presentation, and we will get to those at the end. And forewarned, this is an interactive presentation. So have your phones ready, right, Bob? And um, get ready to participate. Uh, I do want to mention one upcoming event that the Bar Association is hosting. It's our all sections summer mixer, June 26th at Hazy Barbecue in Danville. So it's free for all CCCBA members. So I encourage you all to come and hang out and have a good time before it gets too hot. And with that, I will get ready to turn it over to Bob. Bob has practiced law for more than 30 years. He has been mediating cases since 2016. He views himself as a facilitator, river guide, and occasional bulldog. He finds that two of the hallmarks of a successful mediation are advanced preparation and tenacity. He's affiliated with Judicate West, where he mediates business, real estate, employment, construction, personal injury, medical malpractice, and trust litigation cases. With that, I'll turn it over to Bob, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. Nice way to spend our lunch hour together. And as Sarah noted, this is a Zoom meeting, but the program is really set up to take questions at the end, but there's participation that you get to use your phone to vote with. So I'll go to the next slide. And you can scan that QR code or go to menti.com. Either one will take you to the screen where you can get your phone set up. And it's fun because then you get to see everybody else's thoughts on kind of how to handle some of these thorny mediation problems and settlement problems. I see we've got a number of highly experienced mediators with us today, so that's fun to have that added dimension to this. Today we'll talk about 4 reasons why the other side won't settle at mediation and what you can do about it. So the first question is, why won't the other side settle at mediation? And a key reason is because they don't see the case like you do. So this is an open-ended question. If you haven't, I'm gonna assume everyone had time to scan their phones. I'm gonna go back for 1 minute. If you haven't done it yet, just take your phone, just scan that QR code. I'll pause here for just a minute because that's how you'll participate on the voting. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And if you don't log in here, the code is at the top of every slide. Just go to menti.com and then you can type in the code number and it'll bring you right into this session. Okay, so open-ended question. How can you best help the other side see liability and damages like you do? If you represent a plaintiff, make sure the other side has all the facts and the law that establish liability. Now, this may sound like a self-evident point, but I was just on pre-mediation conferences this morning and I received briefs for mediation and they were short and they didn't give the other side what they needed in order to establish liability. They didn't show it. And so I always do these pre-mediation conferences every chance I get. And it's surprising sometimes, but people are busy and it's sometimes hard to put the time and the work up into a case to give the other side what they need. But if you're going to represent the plaintiff and you want the other side to see the case like you do, you have to make sure they've got all the facts and they've got them marshaled in understandable format and the applicable law unless they already know it. If you represent a defendant, you've got to make sure the other side has all the facts and law that establish a defense. And then sometimes it can take some time and some effort to work up damages, depending on the kind of case it is. But it's essential. It's essential to make sure the other side understands your damages. Sometimes I see counsel come into a mediation and they just kind of have picked a number. It's almost like a dartboard. And if the other side doesn't have a good understanding where your damages come from or how they flow, the likelihood that they're going to really put any kind of stock or credence in that numbers is unbelievably low. So obviously, it's a choice and it's a value judgment. How much time do I spend on this workup? How much time do I spend on the case? Is it worth it? But if the case is worth mediating, and if you want the other side to spend any time at all with your damages, you really have to give them a really good basis of where your damages come from, how they're worked up. You would think that this all would be self-evident, but honestly, it's not. Um, it's kind of surprising how many times you get a case for mediation, and there's just not enough workup done yet for the other side to understand where your case comes from. So even if you're going to forbear discovery and save the cost of discovery for later on if the case gets fully litigated, to really get the other side to see the case like you do, you have to work the case up enough to bring the other side along to where you're at. They just have to have that, or they'll never see it like you do. So here's our vote opportunity. Um, why don't counsel disclose key facts or law at mediation? Why don't they do that? So you can go to your phone, use that as your polling device, and then you can rank these. Let's see what our collective thoughts are. Pretty, pretty strong on they haven't worked up their own case, which, we've all litigated for a long time. We understand how that goes. Um, it would be nice if the case could settle at mediation. You didn't have to spend all that workup time. But yeah, that's certainly my experience as well on the mediation side of things. The counsel just haven't spent their time yet working at their own case. So one thing you learn about mediation after you become a mediator is that it takes on your own personality, just the way that litigation takes on your own personality. People litigate according to their own personalities. But the way it works for me is I always do. Well, there's a few exceptions, but almost always I do a pre-mediation conference. And at those conferences, I don't do them just to make sure that we all understand what's going on or, preliminaries. They are substantive conferences. In a very real sense, the mediation starts early. It starts at the pre-mediation conference. And so I'm a little bit of an outlier on this. I ask for briefs 2 weeks before the mediation. And it isn't just fluff. I ask for them and I actually try to really get them 2 weeks in advance. I try to read them as soon as they come in. I don't always make it, but then I schedule the pre-mediation conferences a week after briefs are due. That gives me time to review and digest the briefs. Then we meet a week before the case, not just a day or two. That's so that if the case hasn't been worked up yet, we have some runway yet to work up the case. And in a surprising number of cases, that time is used to really good advantage. And people need something, and I pick something up. I ask them questions. What about this? The other side's going to have questions about that. And it's like people go home with homework, and they finish putting the case together. But that works out really well for me. And then again, that's just my personality. Um, that's the way it's worked for me. It's the way I tend to do it. I'd like to talk about this second one for a minute. They haven't worked up their own case. Yeah, that's the biggest one for me. They don't plan to settle at mediation. That came in with a dead bang tie with about a concern the other side may influence, taint, or modify the evidence. There, and again, I've been mediating since 2016. So, it's not as long as some people in this room. I know that Peter Mankin's been doing this forever and a day. and others as well. But in my experience, this don't plan to settle at mediation more often comes across that way to the other side when we don't make the kind of progress we hope to at mediation. But as I'm in the room working with both sides, I very rarely see this. Like, I'd say way less than 5% of the time, truly. I get the sense very seldom that people are coming either as a fishing expedition or for some free discovery or whatever. And I do a fair number of mediations before litigation has been filed. And we have a surprising success rate before the complaint's even been filed. I get this very infrequently. Normally, the bigger issue is they haven't worked up their case. I think what happens is when the case doesn't make much progress at settlement, it feels like the other side has come and they just really haven't done this, or they're not doing it in good faith. They don't really plan to settle. They're just doing it for whatever. That's not my experience. It's not my experience. Um, so how do you translate that into what we see at mediation? If it feels like they've come without a good faith interest in trying to actually settle the case, how do we translate that into the topic that we're talking about today? Like, why won't they settle at mediation? What can you do about it? Well, if they don't plan to settle at mediation, there may be very little you can do about it. But again, that's not my experience. My experience is the reason why it feels like they don't plan to settle at mediation are for the other considerations that we'll talk about today. And plan to ambush the other side at trial, again, very rare in my experience, very rare. And the reason I know that is because parties come in and sometimes they're way far apart, and there's maybe already been a mediation or two, they haven't settled, or there's just been some really tense moments between counsel, and it just doesn't feel like the other side's really coming to this. I had a mediation, I don't know, a couple of months ago. It was a big employment case, and they were scheduled for trial in like 2 or 3 weeks. And and it would have been easy for each side to conclude the other side really had no interest in mediation, but they did mediate, and we got it settled. And they just couldn't believe it. But there were these other considerations that had to go on before we could get there, and we'll talk about some of those today. If the key facts or the law are not provided to the other side, then they will not include them in their case evaluation or in their settlement negotiations. So let's go to kind of our second major point. Why won't the other side settle? First one we just talked about. They don't see the case like you do. The things you can do to sum up, frankly, to help the other side see the case like you do, is to give them the facts and the evidence and the law that you have that have shaped your view of the case. And if they don't have those, they're not going to see the case like you do. If they do have those, they may still not see the case like you do, but they won't see the case differently because they don't have this benefit of the same facts and law. And so you've done what you can to bring them to that first point or to satisfy that first point about helping them see the case like you do, because you've provided them what they need in order to evaluate it the way that you have. Now, the second one here, why won't the other side settle? Because they don't value the case like you do. So even if they see liability and they understand liability, even if they agree with liability, and that happens sometimes. Sometimes, you just have these cases and they just, you know, there's just not really a defense. So it all becomes about the damages because liability is not an issue. Or if liability is really, really strong or really clear, then it is this second one. Why won't the other side settle? Because they don't value the case like you do. Genuine differences of opinion and likely trial outcomes account for many differences in case valuation. And yes, there is room for difference of opinion, even from seasoned veteran litigators with lots of trial experience under the belt. There's room for difference in that case valuation. This is not the situation in every case, but I'll say this. Money is always important, but especially in some cases, it's not always the only answer. You especially see this in cases where there's a long history between people. So this morning I was on the phone about a trust litigation case. And this same issue came up. We're talking about money, but money's not really the issue here. It's not about the money. It's about other things, even though we're using money to sort of talk back and forth about what we need to do and how this case is going to be settled. So settlements are driven by decisions. Decisions are based on values and some non-monetary considerations really drive the values. They really can significantly affect the negotiations. The other side may not always tell you when their non-monetary values are driving their negotiations. But that doesn't mean that the non-monetary values aren't, in fact, driving the negotiations. And even if the language that's being used is money, sometimes what's really driving things are these non-monetary considerations. And that can be true in a lot of different kinds of cases, not just trust litigation cases. So what kind of non-monetary considerations are we talking about? We've all heard this. It's the principle of the thing, or I can't let them get away with that, or I don't want them to do this to someone else, or I'm not going to give them the satisfaction of feeling like they won or that they put one over on me, or I want them to feel pain like I do. It's just not fair. It's not right that I should take all the hit on this. I should feel all the pain, or they just need to feel some of this so they understand what's going on and what they're doing to me. Or, and this is one of the most common, the biggest ones, they disrespected me. And sometimes you have people right in the mediation that will say that. They disrespected me, those exact words, but you can see it and you can feel it. Other ones, sometimes there's a really strong interest in exerting and demonstrating control, especially when you have these things like trust litigation cases, where there's a long-term relationships. There's a long history, and sometimes it's been one-sided or lopsided, and somebody doesn't want to feel like they're being pushed around any longer by their older sibling that has a whole history of this. They just don't want to do it. So the control issues, or you can have a long-term relationship like an employment relationship or a business relationship where there's a long-term relationship. And if people don't act in such a way the other side feels respected or a little bit of autonomy, some control, sometimes those can be really significant issues. So let's talk for a minute about mediation briefs. I sometimes get mediations where the parties have not shared briefs and do not want to share briefs. So let's talk for a minute about what the key benefits are to sharing your brief with the other side. So a chance to vote on your phone. What are the key benefits to sharing your brief with the other side? By sharing your brief, you invite them to share their brief with you. You pave the way for opposing counsel to share your brief with their client. You save considerable time with a mediator. You project a good faith negotiating style, thereby promoting trust in negotiations. I occasionally get comments like this. Yeah, I haven't shared my brief, but I will share my brief, but only if they share their brief. Okay, well, that's fair. That's fair. There's something that could be said for sharing your brief, even if the other side didn't, if they absolutely wouldn't. And that's kind of plays into these a little bit, but that's pretty uncommon. Most of the times, either the parties don't share them or they do share them. Sure, the runaway winner here, you project a good faith negotiating style, therefore promoting trust in negotiations. Absolutely. I mean, it's such a common experience to come into a mediation and have one side absolutely demonize the other side. And then you go in, whether it's counsel or a client, and then you walk in the other room, or these days you zoom into the other room, and you get the exact same response from the other side. Absolute demonized. And the problem when you have that is if one side is demonizing the other side, there's just no trust and no confidence. So everything is viewed as being suspect. And and so everyone's tense and no one thinks the other side is either going to be reasonable or they're going to be fair. Um, and so they've already started with their backs up. And that's really hard to sometimes bring the cases to consensus because in a very real way, to get to settlement in many mediations, the parties have to trust each other, which sounds odd, but it's absolutely true because if they do not trust each other, they will never tell the other side what they're actually willing to take or what they're actually willing to do for fear the other side will take advantage of it. And I had one of these not long ago. I mean, as a mediator, one of the least pleasant experiences as mediators, we have to take what the parties tell us. And unless we get signals that they are not going to stick by it, we have to take it at face value. And so if someone tells you, you know what, I'll take this, then you orchestrate the whole rest of the mediation with the other parties to get to that point. And if you get to that point, and then the party says, well, I don't think so, maybe not, and they walk it back and they start negotiating backwards, it is so painful as a mediator to do that because other people have trusted you because you have trusted the first party. And then if the first party backs away and you have to go tell the other people, well, it's actually going to take more, everybody they just go ballistic and with good cause. And they're saying, well, you said this would do it. Well, yeah, I did because I took at face value what the other side said. That type of opportunism in negotiation, I'm here to tell you that it can be success. It can pay handsomely. I've watched it happen. It can pay handsomely, but you're going to lose a lot of trust with the other side. If you ever negotiate with them again, you're going to lose a lot of trust with the mediator. It's very opportunistic and very sharp dealings. It can be very successful, but is it ever miserable to deal with as a mediator? So yeah, we take it at face value. So this one, you project good faith negotiating style, promoting trust in negotiations. Absolutely. You let the other side know, yep, I'm not hiding something. I'm not trying to pull a fast one on you. So that's a great reason to share the brief. The second one, you save considerable time with the mediator. Absolutely. If the parties won't share their briefs, then what that means is the briefs are confidential. I just go straight into mediations and I say, I find a free flow of information that helps me settle cases. Have you shared your brief? No, will you please do it now? And that gives me a playing field to work with. And now I have a lot of material to work with that I can talk with the other client about. I can go into the other side and I can explore your case with the other side, which in my view of mediation is exactly what a mediator needs to be doing. When the mediator is not with you, before I started mediating, I was always going, what's going on? I mean, in the other room, they've been gone for like 2 hours. What in the world is going on? In my view, what the mediator is sometimes what is best done is that the mediator takes your arguments and then really explores them with the other case, like, well, the other side's saying this. How's that going to play at trial? How are their witnesses going to testify? How's the evidence going to come in? Is that going to be a concern for you? And what the mediator is really doing is test driving your case with the other side. The more information you give to the mediator, the more material to work with. And if you let the other side know that this is what my material is, and the mediator takes it the next step and really explores it with the other side, sometimes that can help the other side see the case the same way that you do, and it just brings the parties closer together. You paved the way for the opposing counsel to share your brief with their client. When I come into a mediation, the almost the very first thing I do is to make a decision, make an evaluation of who's driving the bus. Sometimes it's the client, sometimes it's the attorney. Sometimes you can't tell, but most of the time you can. Who's driving the bus? If it's counsel and they've got all the benefit of law school and 20 years of practice or whatever, and they know what they're doing and they're competent and they're capable, great. We can work with that. If it's the client and the client is calling the shots and the attorney has lost control or is having difficulty with client control, that can be different because clients sometimes don't have very realistic views about what's going to happen at trial or what can be done. So when I was litigating, I always looked at my brief as an opportunity to share my opening statement with the opposing client because I didn't know who was driving the bus, the client or the attorney. And I didn't know if the attorney would even share it with the client. And I was hoping that they would. And I would use it as an opportunity for them to try and see the case that I did. So that can have some nice value. And of course, then we've already talked about this, about sharing their brief with you and the value of that. Why submit your brief on time or early? I understand about the dynamics of practice. I understand being overwhelmed. A 40-year litigation career is 40 years of feeling like there's chronically not enough time and feeling like there's chronically too much to do. It's just the way the practice goes. So sometimes it's hard to structure things so that you can get a brief early or even on time or even early. It's not easy to do that. But what are the benefits collectively? What's our thought? So one is you increase the likelihood the mediator will have time to thoughtfully review it. Yes, yes, because mediators have schedules too. If you want the mediator to understand your case so that they can explore it with the other side, the last thing you want to do is send your mediation brief at 11 o'clock the night before the mediation. Sometimes the mediators will just do it. They'll power through that night, or I'll get up early in the morning and read it 6 next morning. But if there's driving involved, sometimes I can't do that. And so sometimes I can't give it as much view as I want. And then you're coming in sort of half baked in the mediation, even though you've done the best you can. So if you want the media to have time to review it, if you want them to explore the other party, especially in the pre-mediation conferences, which can be very valuable time, give the mediator the tools they need to advance your issues or explore your issues with the other side. And the thing that's completely in your control is timing on the mediation brief. We've talked about this from the second one. You give the opposing client time to reflect on it. Yes. Sometimes we see that at mediation. I heard this great quote a few months ago. I can't believe I litigated for 40 years before I ever heard it, but I've said it 100 times now. If you hang the meat too high, the dog won't jump. If you hang the meat too high, the dog won't jump. And some mediations, frankly, are poised to settle. And the parties already are willing to negotiate or reduce their claims or increase their offer so much that it just takes the merest, almost a whiff of wind, and the case will settle. And you walk into the mediation, that case is going to settle almost regardless of what the mediator does, because the parties are already there. But then there are other mediations where the parties are generally so far apart that in order to make a mediation work, both sides are going to have to stretch. Both sides are, and certainly one side, and oftentimes both sides are going to have to stretch. And so there's going to have to be a change in perspective. And so if we get to mediation day and one side is not aware of some dynamite evidence against them, they're not going to have time to reflect it. It's already emotional enough that for them to process that and then get quiet with it and come to peace with it is sometimes a big ask all in one day. And so if you can get the brief to the other client and let them kind of get used to this, especially if there's information they did not previously know, or there's really great law on your side that you think the other attorney may not know. I mean, you're making your own evaluation of your co-counsel or opposing counsel. Did they work in this area all the time? Have they worked this case up? Do they understand the dynamics? Sometimes they don't. And if you can educate them up front and get them the brief, that gives the attorney time to talk with the client, say, well, we've got this, and they can do their own research if need be. That does happen sometimes. This is a key one here. This number 4, if you're dealing with trust litigation cases, number 4 doesn't matter. If you're dealing with a business dispute and there's no insurance, it doesn't matter. If you're dealing with a personal injury case or a construction defect case or anything where there's an insurance policy responding, those insurance companies will not act on a dime. They just won't. They get these cases, they circulate them, they talk about them, they roundtable them, they group evaluate them and what they think the case is worth, and then they equip their counsel and their adjuster, who will be boots on the ground that day, with settlement authority. If they don't have the facts, if they don't have the law, they're not going to give the same type of authority as if they had those things, if they're against their insured's position. But also, they can't work on a dime. They can't move on a dime. They can't do something the day before. Sometimes it takes a week or two. So the sooner you can get a brief to the other side that outlines your case really clearly, if they haven't had it before in a demand letter, if you can give them the details, then they have time to work who they need to work with to get the authority that's going to be necessary to satisfy you and your client. So the importance of this cannot be overstated when there's an insurance company involved. Number four, absolutely critical. Invective is defined as insulting, abusive, highly critical language. So 0 is strongly agree, 10 is strongly, I'm sorry, 0 is strongly disagree, 10 is strongly agree. Invective, as defined up here in a mediation brief, is a useful aid in the mediation process, or can be a useful aid in the mediation process. Opportunity to vote on the phone. So 0 is strongly disagree, 10 is strongly agree. Collectively, where are we at? 0.3, 2.0. Quite a bit down in the area of not helpful as opposed to can be helpful. I'm just going to say one thing about this. When I'm in a mediation room and the mediation briefs have been exchanged, and someone's already feeling pressed and emotional, if there are personal attacks on their characters or motivations, from my perspective, the mediator, it just makes my job so much harder because especially if they're demonizing the other side, they have to come to grips to be willing to negotiate or take less or offer more than what they may have been willing to do. And if they're feeling attacked, sometimes the emotional components take over. They take over rational thought, they take over studied decisions, they take over judicious reasoning. Sometimes it's almost like a more base level need or interest or value or factor of consideration that takes over. So I just watched Treasure of the Sierra Madre with Humphrey Bogart. Classic film. And at one point, Humphrey is starting to get a little bit greedy, and he's seen some opportunities here, and he's realizing, I could have been asking for more. I could have negotiated myself a better deal after the deal he initially started with. And right at the beginning of the movie, he says, "No, I'm not going to try to negotiate a better deal. It's all good. We're all in this together." Once the money comes in, he's going, "Well, I'm watching this money go by." He starts to get motivated by money. The other guy comes and says some things to Humphrey, that sort of impugn his character a little bit. And Humphrey, I don't want to be spoiler alert, but Humphrey just throws the money away. He just throws it away and says, "I don't want your money." He said, "I just didn't want to be called that." It was a visceral, emotional thing that was more important than the money. If we get invective in mediation briefs or that kind of attack, I have to get through that before I can get past that kind of primal need to get to the logical, rational thinking and start talking about money. So as a mediator, it absolutely makes my job stronger. And the problem is counsel take their job seriously, and we feel that for our clients, and we feel like the other side's been intransigent or whatever. And so it's like we want to set the record straight and let them know and call a spade, and we put that down there. And so it's not that it's unjustified, but for a settlement perspective, my suggestion is this: before anybody puts invective in a brief, make a very studied evaluation. Is this likely to push me further from settlement from the other side, push them further away, or likely to bring them closer, and then act accordingly? Why won't the other side settle? Because they don't see the case like you do, because they don't value the case like you do, because they genuinely expect to prevail at trial. Sometimes settlement seems impossible because the parties are in different universes. So when the parties are light years apart, and we see this regularly in mediations, why don't they just keep chiseling away with offers and counteroffers until they reach a settlement somewhere in the middle? So you've got the plaintiff who is off the charts, you've got the defendant who's below the basement. How come they just don't keep exchanging offers, numbers and offers back and forth? Why don't they do that? Sometimes that works. So these ping pong or two-step cases, frankly, as far as protocol or mechanism, vehicle, they are often the easiest to mediate. And the reason I say that is because the parties are doing the work, a lot of the work. They're making roughly equal moves until they meet somewhere in the middle. So that doesn't mean the mediator isn't working hard with the parties to keep the momentum up. But if the parties will continue to talk and continue to make offers and counteroffers, you make a steady or unsteady progress, some kind of progress, till you get to that number that works it. So for me, my experience, those are the kind of the most predictable, easiest cases are where we do the two-step or the ping pong. But 80% of my mediations do not go like that. Probably a full 80% do not go in this way. The more challenging cases are those where a party won't even respond to a move unless the other side makes another move or a major move. So 80% of my cases go like this: demand, offer, settle. Literally, demand, offer, settle. Two moves on both sides, and then you settle. That's probably 80% of my cases that I do. And I get a lot of cases though. So why do parties do this? Instead of making the chisel, let's just move a little bit more. Why do they sometimes refuse to even make an offer till the other side will make a major move? Why do they parties do this? Okay, here's a chance. Open-ended question on your phone. Let's get our collective thoughts. You don't want to look in front of the other side. Okay, good. Parties set an internal cap before the mediation. Yes, sometimes that's true. Power play. Yes, could be that. Afraid of not getting the best deal. Yes. They want to see how much the other party is actually able to play. Yes. They truly do expect to prevail at trial. Yes. They have no more money available to settle. Yes. Unwillingness to show their hand. They think the opening offer is too high. Don't want the midpoint to be a foregone conclusion. Yes. Because people lack critical thinking skills. Some attorneys think they're going to outsmart the fox and refuse to come to the right planet. Yes. Unwillingness to show their hand. I'd like to talk about that one, about unwillingness to show their hand. I cannot tell you how many cases I have settled where we have this dynamic: demand, offer, stop. You know, and it's like we all know the statements. I'm not going to bid against myself. They need to get serious. They didn't come here to settle. I mean, the list is it's a short list, but it goes on. That's the idea. But really, when we're saying those things, what is it that we're doing? What is it that we're doing? What is it that counsel are looking for when they're making those kind of comments or unwilling to move? Two key reasons are either that the midpoint is wrong, like we talked about in the last screen. And if the party's aiming for the midpoint's wrong. And so it's like, if I keep going at this, we're going to have the wrong midpoint. So I'm not going to do anything. That's one. The other one is that the party has no confidence that the other side will ultimately move into the right negotiating range. So in other words, I'm willing to negotiate. I'm willing to give up more. I'm willing to offer more, but it can't be in that range. The midpoint's in the wrong area, or it's the whole wrong range is wrong. So I've got to stop. Okay. So how is that viewed? How is that viewed by the other side? Because when the parties stop exchanging offers, the path forward may not be entirely clear. What should you do if the other side will not even respond to your good faith move? Should you propose brackets? Should you suspend the mediation and try to file some kind of motion that's going to shift things somehow? Suspend the mediation, let them think it over, see if they're really serious about this. Terminate the mediation, just say, you know what, they aren't serious, I'm going to go to trial. Empower the mediator. Empower the mediator. Suspend the mediation, let them think it over. How is that viewed by the other side? When if you're the side that's not going to make a move at all, how is that viewed? I heard a mediator within the last couple months talk about a mediation where they had 63 moves. 63 moves, and they settled. But he said the defense would come up a dollar at a time, and then the plaintiff would do more. So the message being conveyed by the defense is, yeah, we're still here. We're still willing to settle. We're not shoving this in your face. We're not denigrating your offers, but we're doing it a dollar a time. Why would somebody move a dollar at a time? I mean, that almost feels like an insult, and yet it's not. It says, yeah, we're interested in talking, but it's this huge telegraph, and we know this. We know at mediation, we know at settlement, we telegraph to the other side what we're willing to do and what's important to us. And if you telegraph, I'm willing to continue working, but I'm only going to come up a dollar, what you're telegraphing is, I'm willing to settle, but it has to be in a different range. That's what's being telegraphed. Now, brackets can be that they can be very effective because neither side will move, and so it encourages people to continue working it, and it sends all the right messages. Yeah, you move, I'll move, we'll be fair, we'll both work on this together, we'll do that. I want to talk about this empower the mediator. Empower the mediator depends on your mediator's skill set, their disposition, and their approach to mediation. We all know that, but just about the first thing you need to do when you're getting ready to do a mediation. And sometimes you can't because the other side has picked a mediator and you don't know them. And despite all your vetting, you can't really figure out a lot of who they are. You get some ideas. But one of the most important things that you can do, if it's an easy case, it doesn't matter. If it's an easy case, it's poised to settle. You walk in, doesn't really matter what happens very much. Case is going to settle. Parties have already made up in their mind. I'm willing to offer more than the other side demands, although neither side knows that. The other side, yeah, I'm willing to take less, than what the defendant's willing to pay. You don't know that, but you get to mediation, you find that out. So in those situations, not so critical. You don't know those on the front end though, because the other side hasn't telegraphed that to you for good reason. But empower the mediator. It depends on your mediator's skill set, disposition, and approach to mediation. So what happens is the first thing that happens with mediation, other than deciding you're going to go, is to figure out who is the mediator that best matches up with my approach and what I'm trying to do in this case and what I think the needs of the other side are. That's a key consideration. So empowering the mediator depends on your mediator's specific skill set, disposition, and their approach to mediation. Some mediators are most comfortable conveying demands and offers between the parties without pressing the parties too much. It's like, the sanctity of the process. The parties are the masters of their own fate. It's their case. I'm not going to settle it. The parties are going to settle for themselves. Really kind of a hands-off approach, respect for the parties and their case. In those mediations, the parties do much or most of the work in determining the other side's appetite for settlement. And they do that by exchanging offers and counteroffers. And so that's how the parties are taking each other's temperature, is by figuring out how are you going to respond to this? I control my offer, so I know how much I'm moving and I know how much you're moving. And so it's a very controlled situation and I can feel good about it. And I have confidence and I have a lot of knowability of the certainty of the outcome, and what this offer is going to be and it's going to do. And I'm not offering more than I want to offer. It's a very controlled approach. And so it's very comfortable, especially for insurance companies. Other mediators will press your case with the other side. They will then, and I talked about this earlier, they will take your facts, your law, and the arguments in your brief and vigorously discuss them with the other side. That is not the case in every mediation. It is not. I know this for a fact. It's just not. It depends. You would think this happens with every mediation, but it does not. Because the mediator is neutral, the parties are often willing to share information with the mediator that they would never share with opposing counsel. If requested by the mediator, the parties will often telegraph a settlement range or number to the mediator without making an actual offer. Before I leave that last point, if your mediator is someone who is going to go in and really advance your case, work your case, then you can empower the mediator by giving them the details on and the information, the tools on which they need to do that. So here's one example of a mediator technique. If requested by the mediator, parties will often telegraph a settlement range or number to the mediator without making an actual offer. Do you see how powerful this is? So in other words, if the mediator isn't just leaving to the parties to exchange numbers through offers and counteroffers on where they're at, but if you hit an impasse and one side will not move, then the other side says, well, why should I move? You're not going to move. This has to be a joint thing. The mediator can go in, if you empower the mediator, and I'm getting to that in just a minute, but if the parties will telegraph a settlement range or numbers to the neutral mediator without making an actual offer, then the mediator can start to put together like a pattern of what might be possible, a structure, and you can see the numbers on where people might be willing to go. They will never communicate that to the other side for the reason being that if they do, the other side is going to use that against them and ask for more or ask them to take less. But because the mediator is neutral, they can trust the mediator if they do trust the mediator, if that kind of trust has been developed, so that the mediator can get a sense of where they may actually be prepared to go that day. And that's not through the offer, counter offer, ping pong approach. It's just with the mediator. If both sides do this, then the mediator is able to explore settlement possibilities at specific ranges or even specific numbers that look very different from the formal offers being exchanged between the parties. The way you empower the mediator, and you have to make sure that it works with your mediator, that they're willing to do this and that they operate this way. But one of the ways you empower the mediator, and a key one, is that you show your hand a little bit. Like, here's what we'd be willing to do. Here's what we're willing to do. And then you rely on that mediator to skillfully work with that to see if that matches up with what the other side has. And it's almost like it's almost like a marriage broker, the old marriage arrangers. Is it, can we get a marriage in this case with these personalities at these types of numbers? People, if they have not done this before, can be very hesitant to do it, especially insurance companies. They're afraid that if we come in and no, we want to, I mean, the typical response from the insurance company is we want a hard number offer from the other side. We want a hard number offer. Well, I can't get that. They're way up here. But if I could get this, do you think that might be possible? Well, I don't know. We could talk about that, but we want a hard number offer because then you're the master of your offer. And the insurance company just knows, I mean, frankly, all they have is money. That's all they have. It's money. And they have to make sure they keep the tap turned down so it doesn't bleed out too fast out of that hose bib or out of that valve. And so if they know that if the other side starts getting a whiff of what might be possible, they can smell blood in the water or whatever in the air, they're going to start going up, and that they cannot bear the thought of that. So that's why they want to know exactly what it's at. But if you can get enough trust with the insurance company, you can even get insurance companies to negotiate on this basis. And when you do this for the difficult cases, really fantastic things can happen. And people walk out saying things like, I never thought that case would settle. I can't believe we got there. I mean, they can't believe it because the other side was so far out of their reach and never could communicate what they might be willing to do. And sometimes they hadn't even decided they'd be willing to do that. So the mediator, it's a couple of things. It's like, what are you willing to do? And maybe you really ought to think about this for these reasons. So sometimes it's a process of investigation. Sometimes it's a process of counseling with them that if you don't do this, here are the things that might realistically lead to. I use that word deliberately instead of persuading, counseling with them that this might actually be in your best interests for these reasons. And then once you're willing to do that, and you can see if there's this matchup, then what happens is you're not doing the back and forth two-step anymore. What a settlement looks like is this: demand offer, settle, without any movement, just one number. Not even sometimes a range, sometimes a number. It's surprising how often that'll work on these difficult cases. This approach to mediation requires a high degree of mediator skill and a very high degree of trust between counsel and the mediator. Because if the counsel think the mediator is just going to come back and keep asking them for more, they will never tell you what they're willing to do. If they've had a bad experience with this before where they've been through mediation, and mediator said, well, what if I can do this? And they give them that number and then they're coming back for more. They feel a little bit disabused. They're going to be very hesitant to do this. Or if they don't think you have the skill to actually pull it off, sometimes they don't do that. But if there's a high degree of trust, capability by the mediator, and trust between counsel and mediator, this can work, and it can work really, really well. Results can be dramatic. So we've kind of talked about this, but here's an opportunity for another question. Why is trust between the mediator and the party so important in this approach? We've talked about this with open-ended questions. And maybe there's some different approaches here, different thoughts we need to talk about for a minute. Okay, enough said. Why won't the other side settle? Because they don't see the case like you do, because they don't value the case like you do, because they genuinely expect to prevail at trial, and because they want to get the best deal possible. When the other side won't settle because they want the best possible deal, they aren't negotiating the case. They're negotiating you. So in other words, it's not that there's some issue about liability, or it's not that the damages don't flow or don't follow, or it's not that there's a question on the law. We understand the facts, we understand the law, we understand the damages. How good a deal can we get? And that depends on who you're dealing with in the other room, client and counsel. What are they willing to do? How far are they willing to move? It's a negotiation that's personal. It's like when you're taking tests. Instead of knowing the material, it's like, how's the question written? What kind of questions look like the best answers just on the way the questions are put together? Same kind of idea. Sometimes parties employ hardball negotiation tactics in trying to get the best deal possible. But most parties are focused primarily on their own settlement needs, values, and goals. I promise you this is true from my experience in mediation. There are people who will employ hardball tactics to try and squeeze the other side to get the best deal possible. But the majority of cases that I deal with, and I deal with a substantial number of cases, people come into settlement and they're focused on their own settlement needs, their own settlement values and goals. And that becomes apparent as you spend hours with them throughout the day. So what that means is instead of not necessarily trying to stand back or take a step back so that you're not being taken advantage of by somebody who's just trying to bleed more money out of you, or you know anyway, instead of doing that, it's like, what are the needs of this party and where is their head already at? Because I guarantee you the large majority of people come to mediation having already considered and discussed where this case might go on settlement. They've already talked about numbers with their attorney, and sometimes those change dramatically in the course of a mediation, but oftentimes not. Oftentimes not. They have an idea where they want to be and where they're going to be, and they're not always ready to come in and just lay that down at the feet of the mediator and share that with the mediator, for good cause. We know this intuitively, that if we offer a certain amount, or we say we'll take a certain amount, that someone's going to try and work us up or work us down from there. We understand that. Now, that's not to say in these mediations there isn't room for some good old-fashioned horse trading. So sure, there is. There is room, of course, for horse trading in these things. Why do plaintiffs sometimes come in with a sky-high opening demand? Because they're hoping the defense will accept such a demand, because they want to set the negotiating range at a high level, because they don't want to leave money on the table, because they are being proactive and they expect a low defense offer, and so they want to leave themselves room to negotiate. Why do they come in at these really high demands sometimes? I mean, way high. And everybody knows it's not going to settle at that number, including the plaintiffs. So why make such a big one? Because they don't want to leave money on the table? Expect a low defense offer. Set the negotiation range at a high level. They're hoping the defense will accept such a demand. My experience is consistent with this fourth one. It's rare that those really high demands, they're hoping the defense will accept such a demand. There's probably a certain amount of them thinking that the defense expects this, So for a reasonable, self-respecting case, we need to do this because the defense expects that. The reality is, when I'm in mediation, sometimes I'll say to the defense, "Now look, I have an opening demand for you. Please recognize this is an opening demand. I have confidence that the plaintiffs would give you an improved demand. It's the first demand. Everyone knows it's not their final or their best or their lowest number. It's just a place to start." And everyone will say, "Yeah, yeah, we got that." And then you give the demand, and people are like floored and they're like offended. And it's like, and you're going, "It's just an opening demand. I told you it's not based in reality." But people take them at face value sometimes. And sometimes they can say, "Well, we're just going to get it. We're going to leave. What's the point? I have things to do. This is not going anywhere." Um, yeah, the plaintiffs, all of these reasons, they want to set the negotiation range. They do expect a low defense offer. They don't want to leave money on the table. These are all interrelated, and of course, it's accurate. So why don't the plaintiffs use their bottom line number for an opening demand? What's our highest number? What do we think the most frequent mindset is in the minds of the plaintiffs' counsel? Plaintiffs' true bottom line is something less, negotiate accordingly, of course. If you come in with your real number and then you refuse to move from there, everyone's going to think, well, that's just a starting point. We all know how the game is played. And then if you don't move, well, now you're not being fair. You're not being reasonable. You're just being hard nosed. So we can't negotiate with that. And it can absolutely stall negotiations. So it's part of the gamesmanship, part of the dance, the protocol that we all understand. Of course, of course, of course. Okay, that wraps up our program for the day. I send out a monthly newsletter on mediation and ADR topics. If you're interested in hearing and being put on my list, send me an email and I'll add you to the list. Um, it's a dynamic process, and I've enjoyed being with you today. We're right at the hour mark, so we have a couple minutes for questions, and then if there's questions or comments after, I'm happy to stick around and we can take as much question or answer as there is interest in it. But that's the end of our program. Thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you, Bob. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, that's great. If not, I want to thank everyone for attending, and of course, thank Bob for doing another great presentation for our Bar Association. We truly appreciate it. Once again, keep an eye out for your materials, certificates, and evaluation, and we'll see you next time.
Right, Ron's got his hand up. We got a question here.
Oh, oh, it was the clapping. So there was a clapping, and in the comments is excellent program, Bob, from Peter. Um,
And then
I
Ron
think
wants to
Ron's got
say
a question.
something.
I think Ron wants to say something. Go ahead, Ron.
Bob, that was a great program, and I have not seen this application used before, this Mentor.
Mentimeter. Yeah,
Yeah, that is amazing. I like that.
it's really fun. Yeah,
That
it's
is
really fun.
great. It was really good. Agree with you 100% on everything you said.
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, Ron's a longtime mediator, and I mediated with Ron before I started doing the mediation practice myself, and had some great times. Yeah, with Ron. Thanks. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, this Mentimeter, you can use it for free if you only do a limited application or use of it, but I have more than that. So it's just a few dollars a month for a monthly subscription. It's not very much, and they have a nice library of photographs, and you can use it for all kinds of stuff. Yeah, glad you enjoyed it. Other questions, other comments? No? Okay,
All right. Thanks,
go forth and
everyone.
conquer.
Thank
All
you,
right,
Bob.
bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.